You didn't suddenly wake up one day and decide you were carrying the relationship. Your body knew, long before your mind was willing to admit it. You felt it in the constant mental load, in remembering everything, so nothing would fall apart, in adjusting your tone, so conversations stayed smooth, in sensing shifts before they were spoken. You weren't dramatic. You were attentive, in a dynamic that required vigilance. At first, it felt like love, like commitment, like emotional maturity. You told yourself, this is what partnership looks like. One person notices more. One person cares deeper. One person holds the emotional thread. But slowly, that role became heavy. Not because you were weak, but because it was never shared. You were the one, checking in, following up, clarifying, repairing, bridging gaps that shouldn't have existed. And the more you carried, the quieter your needs became. Not intentionally, automatically. Your nervous system learned that harmony depended on you. So it stayed alert, scanning, managing. That's not intimacy. That's emotional labor. Without acknowledgement, the moment you realized you were carrying the relationship wasn't loud. It wasn't a fight. It was a pause, a moment where you stopped explaining, stopped reminding, stopped initiating, and nothing moved unless you moved it. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was revealing. You noticed how little came toward you when you stopped reaching, how quickly connection stalled without your effort. That realization didn't make you angry. It made you tired, because exhaustion is the body's signal that something is unsustainable. You weren't asking for too much. You were compensating for too little. And compensation always has a cost. It cost you spontaneity. It cost you rest. It cost you the ability to just be present without monitoring the bond. You were emotionally intelligent inside an emotionally imbalanced dynamic. That's why it took time to see. You kept giving the benefit of the doubt. You assumed responsibility instead of questioning reciprocity. But your body kept the score. Every unanswered reach, every unmet need, every time you felt alone, while technically together. That's when the shift began. Not outward, inward. You stopped over-functioning, not to test them, but because you couldn't keep abandoning yourself to maintain connection. That's not quitting. That's self-preservation. And once you stop carrying, the truth becomes unavoidable. Either the relationship stands on its own, or it collapses without your effort holding it up. That moment changes you because you realize love that requires carrying isn't partnership, it's endurance. After you realize you were carrying the relationship, something subtle happens inside you. You don't confront immediately. You don't make demands. You don't even fully articulate it yet. You start watching, not in suspicion, in clarity. You notice how often you were the first to reach, how silence stretched, unless you filled it, how emotional closeness arrived only after you initiated it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's when grief begins. Not dramatic grief, quiet grief, the kind that settles in your chest when you realize you've been relating from effort, not mutuality. You grieve the fantasy that you were building something together, because the truth is, you were building it for two and maintaining it alone. This realization often brings self-doubt, not because you're weak, but because you were trained to internalize imbalance as personal failure. You ask yourself, did I expect too much? Was I too sensitive? Maybe this is just how relationships are. These questions aren't curiosity, they're conditioning. You learned early that love meant adaptation, that being easy kept connection stable, that expressing need risked withdrawal. So you learned to preemptively manage, to soothe before conflict, to explain before being misunderstood, to anticipate before being disappointed. This isn't personality, it's survival. Your nervous system learned that relational safety depended on you staying alert, so it stayed activated, even in moments meant for rest. That's why carrying the relationship felt normal for so long. Your system confused effort with intimacy, but effort doesn't equal closeness. It just delays rupture. When one person carries emotional responsibility, the other doesn't have to grow. They don't have to self-reflect. They don't have to attune. They simply respond when prompted. And over time, that dynamic hardens. You become the container. They become the occupant. You feel responsible for the emotional weather. They move through it without awareness. That imbalance isn't always malicious. Often, it's unconscious. But unconscious patterns still have consequences, and the cost was paid by your body. Chronic tension, mental fatigue, emotional numbness. That crept in quietly. You started feeling lonely, even while partnered, because intimacy requires reciprocity, not just presence, but participation. When you realized you were carrying the relationship, your body didn't ask for dramatic change. It asked for relief. That's when you stopped over-explaining, stopped fixing tone, stopped smoothing discomfort, not as punishment, as exhaustion. And what happened next told you everything. Did they notice? Did they lean in? Did they ask what changed? Without defensiveness? Or did the distance widen? Once your effort receded, this is the part many women blame themselves for. They say, I changed. I pulled away. I ruined it. But the truth is simpler. You stopped compensating. And compensation was the glue. That doesn't make you cold. It makes the dynamic visible. Healthy relationships don't collapse. When one person rests, they adjust, they rebalance, they respond. If a bond weakens, when you stop carrying it, it was never shared weight. It was dependence, and you were the structure. Realizing this hurts because you wanted partnership, not management. And here's the quiet strength in you. You didn't explode. You didn't accuse. You didn't dramatize. You let reality show itself. That's emotional maturity. That's self-trust. Coming online, you began listening to what your body had been saying for a long time. This is too much. This isn't mutual. I'm tired because I'm alone in this. And instead of silencing that signal, you honored it. That choice changes how you relate forever. Because once you know what it feels like to carry the relationship, you'll never confuse effort with love again. After the realization settles, something else becomes clear. You weren't just carrying the relationship, you were carrying the emotional risk. You were the one who felt first, named things first, tried to repair first. You absorbed uncertainty so the connection could stay intact. That kind of emotional labor creates an invisible imbalance because one person becomes brave and the other becomes comfortable. You risked closeness. They benefited from it. You opened conversations. They didn't know how to initiate. You softened conflict. They didn't know how to hold. You translated feelings. They hadn't learned to speak. Over time, that dynamic trains both people. You become hyper-aware. They become passive. You anticipate. They respond. You feel responsible for emotional continuity. They assume it will be maintained. That's not because they're cruel. It's because growth was outsourced, and you were the one doing the work. When you stopped carrying, you didn't become less loving. You became honest. Honest about what it costs to be the only one attuned. Honest about how much energy was going outward. Honest about how little was coming back. This is where guilt often shows up. A quiet guilt, not for what you did, but for what you stopped doing. You feel it when you don't follow up, when you don't explain yourself, when you don't rush. To restore closeness, your system has been conditioned to believe distance equals danger. So when you allow space, it can feel wrong, even when it's necessary. That discomfort doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're disrupting a pattern that depended on you overfunctioning. And disruption always creates sensation. Your body isn't asking you to go back. It's asking you to tolerate the unfamiliar. Because for the first time, you're letting connection exist without managing it. And that reveals something essential. Who steps forward when you step back? Who feels the gap? Who notices the absence of your effort? Who only feels close when you're the one creating closeness? This isn't a test, it's information. And information is stabilizing. You no longer have to guess why you felt lonely. You don't have to question why you were exhausted. The pattern explains it. Carrying the relationship required you to stay activated. Letting go allows your nervous system to settle. That's why your body feels different now. Less tense, less vigilant, less preoccupied. You're not waiting for the next emotional shift. You're not scanning for distance. You're present, and presence changes what you tolerate. You start to notice how little effort feels acceptable now, how quickly imbalance stands out, how your body responds to reciprocity with ease. This isn't you becoming rigid, it's you becoming aligned, aligned with the truth that relationships shouldn't require one person to hold the weight, aligned with the understanding that mutuality is felt, not negotiated. And once your body learns that, it won't go back. There's a calm that comes after you stop carrying. Not relief at first. Relief comes later. At first, there's stillness, and stillness can feel unsettling. When you've been responsible for motion, you notice how much space appears. When you're no longer managing connection, how much energy returns to your body, how your thoughts slow when you're not anticipating someone else's emotional state. This is where self-trust deepens, not because you affirm it, but because your body experiences what it's like to not be braced. You realize how long you were holding tension you thought was normal, how often you minimized your fatigue because it didn't seem serious enough. But seriousness isn't the measure. Sustainability is. Love that requires you to stay alert is not love that nourishes. It drains quietly, and you didn't notice the drain because you were too busy keeping things afloat. Now, you don't rush to fill silence. You don't rush to clarify discomfort. You let moments breathe, and in that breathing, truth shows up. Some people don't know how to meet you unless you lead them there. Some connections were built on your initiative, and when you step out of that role, there's nothing left to lean on. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you were the structure, and you're allowed to stop being one. You're not withdrawing love. You're redirecting it toward yourself, toward balance, toward relationships that don't require translation. You start choosing differently now, not from fear, from discernment. You notice who meets you without effort, who responds without prompting, who carries their share without being reminded, and your body relaxes around them. That's the signal, not chemistry, not intensity, ease, mutual ease. You don't need to announce that you're done carrying. You don't need to explain what changed. Your boundaries speak in how you show up or don't. And the people who are capable of partnership will adjust. The ones who relied on your overfunctioning will feel the absence. That's not cruelty. That's reality. You didn't become less loving. You became more honest about what love requires. And now, your nervous system knows the difference between connection and responsibility. If this feels familiar, let it be. You don't need to act. You don't need to confront. Just notice how much lighter it feels to stop holding what was never yours alone. That awareness is the beginning of a different kind of relationship, one where you are met, not carried.